Hello and welcome back to another little dungeon video. In this one we're going to take a look at how you can make a few things that you might find in a crypt or a tomb. So that includes things like stone sarcophagi, vases and urns, a brazier and so on. And we'll start things off with the most obvious choice, the tombs themselves. But before we begin, you might want to go back and watch the tips video number 2 just to see how I built pieces like this. And if I can figure out how to do it, I'll put a link down here somewhere. If not, it'll be in the description. Okay, so once you've got a few of those made, all we need to do is roughly cut out one of the tomb lids and then glue that down to a piece of thin cardboard. And here you can see me doing that with just a cheap glue stick as normal. Then, once it's dried, we can just trim it to size with a sharp knife. Like so. Next, we just cover the back of this with some glue, and then the only thing left to do is to stick it down to the top of the piece that we made earlier. And there's our finished tomb. Okay, so that was easy enough. So now we'll have a go at making some basic pottery. And here's a quick look at the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So the first thing to do is cut out one of the decorative strips. And as always, try to be careful when you're doing this. Then we're going to need something to wrap the texture around. And for this I'll be using various size drinking straws. And in this instance I'll be using the larger milkshake or smoothie variety, i.e. the one on the left. But if you've not got any of these to hand, you can always use an empty toilet roll tube in exactly the same way as we did for the barrels in episode 3. Okay, so next we need to cut out a piece of the texture that's big enough to wrap around the straw, and then rough up the outside of the straw itself with a piece of sandpaper. Then it's just a simple matter of gluing the texture around the straw and then setting it to one side to dry. And while that is drying, we can also cut out one of the lids and then glue that down to some thin cardboard. And while we're at it, we'll cut out a piece of the plain texture. First we'll just trim it to size and then perhaps cut off an inch or so. Then apply some glue to the back and fold it back over on itself. Okay then, so once we're happy everything's dry, we can then take the straw, squash it flat and cut off the textured end, like so. And once we've got it back into its circular shape, this will form the main body of the vase. Next we can take the lid, and for the straws that I'm using, the inner circle is a pretty good guide for how big I need to cut it. So I'll just go ahead and do that. Then, just as a kind of quick temporary measure, I'll use the glue stick to fix these two pieces together. But obviously that doesn't make for a great bond, so I'll then either drop in some hot glue or some PVA white glue and then just leave it to dry. And once again, while we're waiting for that to dry, we can then take the plain texture and cut that into 2 strips that are both approximately 1/8 of an inch wide. Then we'll need to wrap one of these strips around something like the wooden barbecue skewer that you can see I'm using here, and then glue the overlapping sides together. So something like that. Then we just need to do the exact same thing with the second piece. So, just like before, we'll give them a minute or two to dry, and then just trim off the ends so that they look something like this. Then, all I'm doing here is I'm trying to make the one side of the loop flat, so essentially changing it from this shape to this shape. And then we'll just glue these pieces on opposite sides of the vase, so that they kind of look like handles. And there you go. If it all goes according to plan, it should end up looking something like this. But if you'd like to add a bit more variety to your pieces, we can take some more of the plain texture and trim off another inch or 2. Then, just like before, we can apply some glue to one side of the texture and then fold it in half. Then for this next part, we'll need some kind of foam sheet or mouse mat or similar. We'll also need something with a rounded end and a hole punch. So once you're happy that the texture's fully dry, we can take the hole punch and then just punch out a few little circles. Then we can use the paintbrush or whatever it is you're using that's got a rounded end and push the centre of the circle down into the foam mat. And with any luck, that should result in a couple of these small bowl shapes. In addition to those little bowls, I've also got this golden tray texture, which I've just glued to some thin cardboard and then cut to size. And while you could probably use that as it is, if we take the foam mat again, but this time use a small marble, we can do a similar thing just to add a bit more depth and to make it slightly more three-dimensional. So something like this, but apologies there, it's not really showing up very well at this angle. Anyway, once we've made all these little bits and pieces and then glued them to a base, we should end up with something like this. So there's a bowl, the tray, and on the right the vase I made earlier. But like you can see on these two on the left, you can also mix things up a little by just combining straws of different sizes. So individually the pieces themselves might not look that great, but once you put them all together on a base like this, I think they look rather nice. Anyway, now it's time to move on to the braziers, and here you can see that I've glued the top and bottom pieces to some thin cardboard and then I've just cut them out. We'll also need approximately 3/4 of an inch of the metal texture, which I've gone ahead and glued around a small drinking straw and then trimmed it to size. And that should give us the 3 pieces that we require. Next, we'll need to take the foam mat again and using the same marble, we'll curve the underside of the bottom piece, so something like that. And then we'll do the same with the printed side of the top piece. Then we can apply some hot glue to the inside of the straw and glue that to the middle of the base, so something like that. And then we can add a blob of hot glue to the other end of the straw and stick that to the underside of the top piece. And there you go, one finished brazier. So, well, you could leave it like that. If you want to give it a bit more stability, you could always glue it to a base. But, as I say, the choice is yours. Okay, so the only thing left now are these textures, and the idea behind these is to make little shelves or tombs that are set into the dungeon walls. And this is so you can add some decoration to a passage, for example, like you can see in the inset, but without it taking up any of the playable space. So to make one of these, we first need to glue the texture to some thin cardboard again. Then we can just trim that to size using a sharp knife. Next, we'll need to cut out 2 pieces of double corrugated cardboard that are the same length as the texture itself, but only a 1/2 inch wide, and then also a similar size piece of thin cardboard. Then we'll need to glue all 3 of these pieces on top of each other, so that we end up with something that looks like this. And then we can apply some glue to both this piece and the rear of the textured piece, and just stick them both together. So there we go. And as I say, this should give us a nice little shelf or a niche that we can add to any dungeon wall. Okay, so now that everything's done, here's a quick look at a simple layout with a few of these new pieces added. But as you can see, in a small room like this, it can sometimes limit the amount of floor space that you've got to move your miniatures around, which is not always a bad thing, but if you are looking to free up some of this floor space, then here's a very similar layout using the little wall niches instead. Though you can of course just mix and match them however you like. So I suppose that's it for another episode. As usual, I'll leave you with a couple of pictures of these pieces in action, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.